It's 2019. We live in a world where there's constant improvement and growth in terms of technology, education, health, and general lifestyle. Our abilities to create change or start a movement is so much more advanced than what we were capable of even just 5 years ago. But with our world constantly changing, the change isn't always positive. Take, for example, the plastic crisis we have been facing for decades. According to Our World in Data, the plastic production rates increased exponentially from around 3.2 million tons in 1950 to 7 billion tons in 2015. And that only seems to be a problem once we start seeing images of this, and this. Ocean and land pollution all across the news. And I was going to spend the next 10 minutes talking about the dangers of plastic and how it's affecting almost every single living organism, but you would probably be like, I already knew that. So instead, I'd like to take the time to do something a little different and appreciate the progress we have made so far. Let me explain. You see, in 2007, it was recorded that around 93% of Canadian households were committed to some form of a recycling program, compared to the 73% in 1994. Great, right? By taking the time to separate our used products into red, blue, and gray bins, we are making a tremendous impact on the environment. I actually believed that idea up until recently, and so did my family. I remember the recycling guy coming into our grade 4 class and teaching us all about the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, and recycle. But one day, when I was around 13 years old, researching for a school project, I came across an article by National Geographic titled, "A whopping 91% of plastic isn't recycled." I was kind of confused. How could this be possible? I thought we were supposed to recycle. And I must admit, I was a little bit disappointed, but then I realized that I didn't actually know much about the world of recycling. So, after some investigating, I finally understood what goes on when the recycling guy takes away our recyclables. You see, in most countries, it's standard to have plastic wastes either discarded, incinerated, or recycled. In 2015, approximately 55% of the global plastic waste was discarded, 25% incinerated, and just 20% recycled. But the word discarded isn't really specific. So what happens to the 55% that's discarded? Well, it turns out that a lot of these countries don't actually have the effective waste management systems. But now I'm going to talk about mismanaged plastic waste. Mismanaged plastic waste is the accumulation of a material which has been littered or inadequately disposed. This just means that there was the intention of managing the waste, but it wasn't due to reasons such as uncontrolled landfills or dumps. And there's a really important difference between landfills and dumps. Landfills are structures designed to contain waste in such a way that doesn't cause pollution. Dumps, on the contrary, are open to natural elements, which increases the risk of pollution. But many high-income countries actually have effective waste management systems. However, across lower-income countries, inadequately managed waste is significantly higher. Countries in South Asia have plastic waste between 80 to 90% that's inadequately disposed of. But going back to this statistic, why is only 20% of the world's plastic waste being recycled? Well, as many of you probably know, Plastics are an extremely versatile material and has touched almost all aspects of our life. But despite the short-lived satisfaction we may feel when we recycle a piece of plastics, our efforts are often invalid because most plastics can't be recycled, especially single-use plastics, and I'm sure many of you have heard about this. Single-use plastics are the biggest threat because they can't be recycled due to the colors and chemicals that are added to change its form. Additionally, most plastics are mixed materials like a chip bag with a foil lining. And so it's just a lot more costly and time-consuming to recycle. This means that the products are usually worthless, and when the recycled good is less valuable than the original product, it's known as downcycling. And eventually, some products would be so downcycled that it just isn't profitable to recycle them at all. But although many countries have or can have the ability to safely contain waste, why does it feel like all the plastic is ending up in the ocean? Well, it turns out that the process of recycling has a lot to do with trading. You see, recycled plastic waste is currently a product within the global commodity market and is traded around the world. This has a major impact on the way global plastic waste is managed. If countries with effective waste management systems like Canada export their plastic waste to countries with inferior waste management systems, this adds to the plastic pollution. Sometimes developed countries like Canada and the US do this even without the receiving government consent. Not the best idea for our image, right? For the importing countries, this plastic is often discarded into dumps, not landfills, if it doesn't meet the requirements for new products or was contaminated. But even though many countries don't want to deal with their own plastic waste, my naive 13-year-old self thought, but surely Canada does. I mean, we probably have some of the best recycling facilities, and let's face it, we're just too nice to increase the risk of polluting the environment. But recently, we've been hearing a lot about Canada's recycling crisis. China has announced that it will not be accepting around 96% of its plastic waste imports. And so the recycling industry is, needless to say, struggling. From 2010 to 2016, China has imported between 7 and 9 million tons of plastic waste every single year. And because of China's drastic move, a thriving global trade in recycling waste has ceased. Countries like Canada, Australia, and the US are finding it extremely difficult to deal with their own plastic waste. But don't worry, it's not all doom and gloom. There could actually be a positive outcome to this crisis. It could lead to better solutions for managing the world's plastic waste by forcing the development of processing facilities around the world and overall urging companies to create products that are more recycling friendly. And I was amazed at the information I was beginning to learn, and I wanted to help out in my community. So I started off with a local group called Plastic Battle, and this is an image from a beach cleanup I did with them. Here are piles of plastics and other materials that we collected, but only this small pile here was recyclable. But this led me thinking, what if we were able to modify the 3 R's to reduce, reuse, and rethink? Reuse. What comes to mind when you think of reusing? Maybe you had an older sibling and used some of their outgrown clothes, or maybe you finally bought that fancy cotton bag to use on your recycling trips. Research on some plastic alternatives, such as polypropylene, the green reusable bags, has shown that these would have to be used several times for it to be equal to the per-use environmental impacts of that of a single-use plastic bag. In simpler terms, this just means that a green bag would have to be used 12 times for it to be effective, which equates to around 3 months if it were to be used once a week. So it's really not that bad if we just put our minds to it. Reduce. This is something we hear often. Don't use that plastic straw, or stay away from those plastic bags. But because many of us live such fast-paced and high-stress lives, I'm sure reducing your plastic intake isn't number one on your to-do list. Which leads me to think that the government should support the research that goes into creating plastic alternatives and provide the funding and legislation needed to improve our plastic policies. And many countries around the world are already taking action to stop this. Look no further than Canada. Canada has decided to ban harmful single-use products by 2021. Now, this ban would cut down from plastic pollution by cutting down packaging and products like cutlery, straws, and plastic bags. But it's yet to see whether it will come into full effect. Some African countries like Kenya and Zimbabwe have already banned single-use bags. So maybe we need to tackle this issue at a community and government level and encourage those who have the power to do so initiate the change. Companies like Starbucks has intended to remove all plastic straws from its 25,000 and plus locations around the world with recyclable friendly lids. Another fine example is what's going on in the supermarkets of the UK. They are creating an idea of plastic-free aisles which allow consumers to make eco-friendly choices. UK's biggest grocery store, Tesco, has banned the 5-pence single-use bag and replaced them with 10-pence reusable bags. So you can see, with the right kind of government support, a major impact can be made on the way we deal with plastics. Rethink. In my opinion, rethinking the plastic situation is probably the best way of getting closer to fixing this problem. But unfortunately, the plastic crisis as a whole is so incredibly complex, and therefore there are so many controversies as to what the best way is to deal with this issue. Some people even disagree with the bans on plastic. And no, they're not crazy. Research has actually shown that some plastic alternatives, like paper straws, for example, take up a lot more energy and effort to produce, and thus have a greater detrimental effect on the environment. Even biodegradable plastics aren't the true saviors, because they can't just be thrown into your backyard, compost, or recycling. They require industrial composters, and again, if they can't be recycled, if they don't meet the standards. So, as a small experiment, I challenged my family to put a toonie in a jar every single time they used a plastic bag. And let's just say, I had a pretty happy shopping experience that weekend. But this made us realize how big of a consumer we were, and brought a change in the way we thought about buying plastics, even in other situations. Now, my family rarely uses plastic bags, even the small ones, for fruit and vegetables. Another way of addressing this issue is revisiting the way children are taught about waste management. Remember the recycling guy I was talking about earlier? Although he was teaching us about reducing and reusing, major emphasis was placed on recycling, which paradoxically increases the use of plastics. So I think a lot more emphasis and focus should be made on reusing and reducing, because helping our children gain the right eco-friendly values is one of the most important things we can do, since they're the future. This is a chocolate bar. It would take me around 5 minutes to eat, or probably 30 seconds. But regardless, this plastic wrapper could stay on this earth forever. And I'm not going to tell you to avoid chocolate bars because it's literally impossible to avoid chocolate or plastics. Almost everything you've touched today had a direct or indirect association with plastic. Just think about it. And there are so many good people out there committing to beach cleanups and creating awareness, but unfortunately, it could never account for the 1 million plastic bags that are generated every single minute. We have to be able to look at the bigger picture and find a way to turn off the tap, because the plastic crisis isn't something we can ignore any longer. If we can't fix this now, the sink will overflow to an extent where nothing we do can ever help. And if we, as individuals, don't have the ability or power to create a new alternative or come up with some crazy solution, then I encourage you to focus on what we can do. A modification of the 3 R's. Reduce, reuse, and rethink. Thank you.